The fluorescent lights of the Manhattan family courthouse buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Sarah Mitchell clutched her worn leather purse against her chest. Her knuckles had gone white from gripping it so tightly, but she barely noticed. The courtroom smelled of old wood, stale coffee, and the anxiety of 100 broken families who had sat in these same pews before her. She was 32 years old but looked older. The past 3 years had carved lines into her face that hadn't been there before. Lines of worry, sleepless nights, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from working 2 jobs while raising a 6-year-old daughter alone. Her navy blue dress, the nicest thing she owned, had a small stain near the hem that she'd tried unsuccessfully to remove that morning. She'd given up after the 3rd attempt, deciding that Judge Morrison probably wouldn't notice anyway. She was wrong about a lot of things that day, but she was right about one. Judge Richard Morrison wasn't the noticing type. At least not when it came to people like her. Morrison sat behind his elevated bench like a king on a throne, his black robes immaculate, his silver hair perfectly styled. He'd been on the bench for 23 years, and in that time he'd developed a reputation. Some called him fair but tough. Others, particularly those who'd faced him from the defendant's side, had less charitable descriptions. He had a particular disdain for what he called time wasters, people who came into his courtroom with excuses instead of solutions. Sarah's case was number 47 on the docket that morning. She'd been waiting since 7 a.m., watching case after case get called, resolved, dismissed, or continued. Her babysitter, Mrs. Chun from downstairs, could only watch Emma until 3 p.m. After that, Sarah would owe her extra money she didn't have. But none of that mattered now. She had to focus. Her ex-husband, Derek Mitchell, sat on the opposite side of the courtroom with his lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Howard Beckman who'd made a career out of representing deadbeat dads with deep pockets. Derek looked good, better than he had any right to look. His suit was expensive, probably cost more than Sarah made in a month at the diner. He'd lost weight, gotten a tan, and his smile was the same charming one that had fooled her 7 years ago. That smile didn't reach his eyes. It never had. Derek owed $48,000 in child support. For years of payments gone. Vanished into whatever hole he'd been hiding his money in. Meanwhile, Sarah worked the morning shift at Mel's Diner on 42nd Street and cleaned offices at night. Emma needed new shoes. The pediatrician wanted payment for the strep throat visit from 2 months ago. Their apartment had a leak in the ceiling that the landlord refused to fix. And Derek showed up in a $3,000 suit, smiling. Mitchell versus Mitchell, the bailiff called out, and Sarah's stomach dropped to her feet. She stood on shaking legs and made her way to the plaintiff's table. Her court-appointed attorney, a young woman named Jennifer Park fresh out of law school, gave her an encouraging nod. Jennifer meant well, but she was overworked, underpaid, and handling 60 cases just like Sarah's. They'd met exactly twice before today. Your Honor, Jennifer began, standing up with a manila folder that looked pathetically thin compared to the stack of documents on Beckman's table. My client, Ms. Mitchell, is here seeking enforcement of the child support order dated June 2021. Mr. Mitchell has failed to make a single payment in 4 years, totaling $48,000 in arrears. Judge Morrison didn't look up from the papers in front of him. He was reading something else entirely, something that clearly interested him more than Sarah's case. Mr. Beckman, Morrison said, still not looking up. Your client's position? Howard Beckman rose smoothly, buttoning his suit jacket in one practiced motion. Your Honor, my client has experienced significant financial hardship due to circumstances beyond his control. He was laid off from his position at Henderson Financial in 2022, and despite his best efforts, he's been unable to secure comparable employment. He's been working odd jobs, barely making ends meet. He wants to support his daughter, but he simply doesn't have the means. It was such a beautiful lie, delivered with such practiced sincerity, that Sarah almost believed it herself. Almost. But she knew the truth. Derek worked for his father's construction company now, under the table, cash only. He drove a BMW. He'd posted pictures on Instagram just last week from Atlantic City, laughing at a blackjack table with a blonde woman who definitely wasn't his daughter. Your Honor, Jennifer interjected, We have evidence that Mr. Mitchell. Morrison finally looked up, and his expression made Sarah's blood run cold. He looked annoyed, deeply, profoundly annoyed. "Ms. Park," he said, his voice dripping with barely concealed irritation. "I've heard this song and dance 1,000 times. Every single parent who comes through here thinks their ex is hiding money, living the high life while they suffer. Do you have bank statements? Tax returns? Proof of employment?" Jennifer hesitated. "We've requested those documents multiple times, Your Honor, but Mr. Mitchell has failed to produce." "So you have nothing," Morrison interrupted. "Just accusations and suspicions." "Your Honor, with respect," Sarah blurted out, unable to stop herself. "I have photos from his social media. He was in Atlantic City last weekend. He's driving a new car his father owns." "Ms. Mitchell," Morrison's voice cracked like a whip. "You will speak when spoken to, or I will hold you in contempt. Do you understand?" Sarah's mouth went dry. She nodded, shrinking back into her chair. Morrison turned his attention back to the lawyers, but his mind was clearly made up. "Mr. Mitchell claims financial hardship. Ms. Park has provided no concrete evidence to the contrary. Without documentation, I cannot in good conscience find Mr. Mitchell in contempt." "But Your Honor," Jennifer tried again, "the enforcement order will be modified," Morrison said, cutting her off again. "Mr. Mitchell, you are ordered to pay $200 per month going forward. The arrears will be reviewed again in 6 months. $200 for a child, when he owed $48,000. Sarah felt the room spin. "That's not even enough for groceries," she whispered. "Excuse me?" Morrison leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Sarah stood up, her legs somehow still supporting her despite feeling like water. "Your Honor, please. My daughter needs medication. She has asthma. The inhaler costs $150 every month, even with insurance. I'm working 2 jobs. I haven't slept more than 4 hours a night in 3 years. He owes us $48,000. $200 a month won't even." "Ms. Mitchell," Morrison said, and now there was something cruel in his tone. Something that enjoyed this. "I understand that single parenthood is difficult, but the world doesn't owe you a living. Perhaps if you'd made better choices in your personal life, you wouldn't be in this situation. This court cannot force Mr. Mitchell to pay money he doesn't have. Case closed." And then he did something that Sarah would remember for the rest of her life. He laughed. Before she'd even left the room. She turned toward the exit, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of Derek. Not in front of the judge who just laughed at her daughter's suffering. It wasn't a loud laugh. It was barely more than a chuckle, really. But it was there. A small, dismissive sound that said everything about what he thought of her daughter, and her desperate plea for help. The gavel came down. Next case. Sarah stood frozen, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. Jennifer was gathering her papers, whispering apologies. Derek was already heading for the exit with Beckman, probably planning to celebrate. And Judge Richard Morrison had already moved on, already forgotten about her before she'd even left the room. She turned toward the exit, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of Derek. Not in front of the judge who just laughed at her daughter's suffering. She was halfway to the courtroom doors when they opened. The bailiff who'd been standing guard stepped aside quickly, almost reflexively. The quiet murmur of waiting cases died instantly. A man walked in. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe 5'10", but he carried himself like someone who'd never had to prove his authority. He was probably in his late 50s, with silver-gray hair combed back from a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. His suit was black, perfectly tailored, and simple. No flashy tie. No unnecessary jewelry except for a single gold ring on his right hand. But it wasn't his appearance that made everyone in that courtroom turn and stare. It was the way people reacted to him. 2 court officers who'd been chatting near the back straightened up immediately. A lawyer who'd been checking his phone quickly put it away. Even Judge Morrison, who'd been reaching for his coffee, froze with his hand halfway to the cup. The man walked slowly down the center aisle, his footsteps the only sound in the suddenly silent courtroom. Behind him, two other men followed, large, silent, watchful. They didn't need to do anything threatening. Their presence was enough. Sarah stood there, confused, still clutching her purse, as the man walked past her. He smelled like expensive cologne and something else, authority, maybe power. He stopped in the center of the courtroom, directly between the plaintiff and defendant tables, and looked up at Judge Morrison. The judge had gone pale. "Mr. Castellano," Morrison said, and his voice had lost all of its earlier authority. It cracked slightly on the second syllable. "This is unexpected. How can I help you?" The man, Castellano, didn't answer immediately. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, until his eyes found Sarah. They were dark brown, almost black, and completely unreadable. "Tell me," he said quietly, speaking to Sarah but loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. "Did I hear correctly? Did this judge just laugh at you?" Sarah's throat had gone completely dry. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Who was this man? Why was everyone staring at him like he was the president? And why was Judge Morrison looking like he'd just seen a ghost? The man, Castellano, waited patiently, his dark eyes never leaving her face. There was something almost gentle in his expression, which seemed completely at odds with the tension crackling through the courtroom. Sarah finally managed. "Yes, he." After he ruled, he laughed. A muscle twitched in Castellano's jaw. He turned back to face Morrison, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Your Honor," Castellano said, and the way he said that title made it sound like an insult. "I wonder if you remember a case from about 15 years ago. A young woman, maybe 23, 24 years old. She came into your courtroom asking for a restraining order against her husband. He'd broken her arm, put her in the hospital twice. She had photographs, medical records, police reports." Morrison had gone from pale to gray. His hands were shaking slightly as he gripped the edge of his bench. "Do you remember what you told her?" Castellano continued, taking a step closer. "You told her that marriage was sacred, that she needed to work harder at her relationship, that maybe if she was a better wife, her husband wouldn't lose his temper. You denied the restraining order." The courtroom was so quiet that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. 3 weeks later, Castellano said, and his voice had gone very, very soft, "That woman's husband beat her to death in their kitchen. Her name was Maria Castellano. She was my niece." "Oh God," Morrison whispered. Sarah felt her knees go weak. She understood now. Everyone in the courtroom understood. This was Vincent Castellano. She'd heard the name before, seen it in newspapers. He ran half of New York's construction industry, owned restaurants from Little Italy to the Upper East Side, and had connections that ran deeper than most people's family trees. The rumors about him, about his family, were the kind of things people whispered about but never said out loud. "Mr. Castellano," Morrison said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That case, I've regret," Castellano interrupted, "doesn't bring back the dead. Does it, Your Honor?" He turned back to Sarah. "Tell me your name." "Sarah Mitchell," she said, her voice stronger now. "And my daughter's name is Emma. She's 6 years old." Castellano nodded slowly. "And your ex-husband owes you $48,000 in child support." "Yes, sir." But the judge here, Castellano looked back at Morrison, decided that $200 a month was sufficient for a 6-year-old child with asthma, while her father drives a BMW and gambles in Atlantic City. How did he know all that? Sarah hadn't said anything about the BMW or Atlantic City to him. Had he been outside the courtroom? Had he heard through the doors? Derek, who'd been frozen by the exit with his lawyer, suddenly found his voice. "Now wait just a minute. This is a court of law. You can't just..." Castellano turned his head slowly to look at Derek. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Derek shut his mouth so fast his teeth clicked together. Mr. Beckman, the lawyer, had more courage or less sense. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. I must protest this interruption. My client has rights and..." "Your client," Castellano said, still not raising his voice, "is a coward who abandoned his daughter. His rights end where her welfare begins." He looked at Morrison again. Wouldn't you agree, Your Honor? Morrison looked like he wanted to crawl under his bench and disappear. He cleared his throat 3 times before managing to speak. Mr. Castellano, I appreciate your concern, but this is a matter of law. My hands are tied by your hands, Castellano interrupted. And now there was steel in his voice, are tied by nothing but your own prejudice and laziness. This woman presented her case. She showed you evidence. And you dismissed her because it was easier than doing your job, just like you dismissed Maria. He pulled something from his inside jacket pocket, a phone, and tapped the screen a few times. Then he turned it toward Morrison. Derek Mitchell, Castellano read from the screen. Currently employed by Mitchell & Sons Construction, his father's company. Salary of $85,000 per year, paid in cash to avoid tax reporting and wage garnishment. Vehicle registration for a 2023 BMW 540i, purchased 8 months ago for $62,000. 3 credit cards with a combined available credit of $40,000. Savings account at Chase Bank with a current balance of $23,417. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth. All that money, all that time. While she'd been scrubbing toilets at 3 in the morning, while Emma had worn shoes 2 sizes too small because they couldn't afford new ones, while they'd eaten ramen noodles 4 nights a week, Derek had $23,000 in savings. That's private information. Beckman sputtered. How did you? Castellano pocketed his phone. Everyone has friends, Mr. Beckman. Some of us have better friends than others. He looked at Derek, who had gone sheet white. You've been lying to the court, lying to your daughter, lying to the woman who gave you the best years of her life. Derek tried to back toward the door, but one of Castellano's men, Sarah hadn't even noticed him move, was suddenly standing there, blocking the exit. Not threatening, just present. Your Honor, Castellano said, turning his attention back to Morrison. I'm going to make a suggestion, and I strongly recommend you take it. You're going to reopen this case. You're going to order Mr. Mitchell to pay the full $48,000 in arrears within 30 days. You're going to set his monthly child support at $1,500, which is less than 20% of his actual income, so don't tell me it's excessive. And you're going to hold him in contempt if he misses a single payment. Morrison's hands were shaking so badly now that papers were sliding off his bench. Mr. Castellano, I can't just... Can't? Castellano took another step forward. Or won't, because we both know you can. You're a judge. You have discretion. You can review new evidence at any time. Or have the rules changed since you laughed at this woman's suffering? The word laughed cracked through the courtroom like a gunshot. I wasn't. Morrison tried. I didn't mean. It was just what? Castellano's voice could have cut glass. Just funny? A single mother working herself to death while her child goes without medication. That's amusing to you? No, of course not. I apologize. Ms. Mitchell, I sincerely apologize. Sarah didn't know what to say. She was caught between terror and hope, between disbelief and a desperate need to believe that this was really happening. Your apology means nothing, Castellano said flatly, if your ruling doesn't change. Morrison looked around the courtroom desperately, as if searching for help. But the other lawyers had suddenly found their shoes fascinating. The bailiffs were staring straight ahead. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her hands frozen over the keys. Jennifer Park, Sarah's lawyer, was the only one who seemed to have any life in her. She stood up slowly, clearing her throat. Your Honor, if I may, in light of this new evidence regarding Mr. Mitchell's financial status, I would like to formally request a reconsideration of your ruling. Morrison grabbed onto that lifeline like a drowning man. Yes, of course. The court will. I'm ordering a 30-minute recess while I review. While we examine. No recess, Castellano said flatly. Rule now. Mr. Castellano, Morrison said, and there was something pathetic in his tone now. Please, I have procedures I must follow. If I just change my ruling immediately, it could be grounds for appeal for... Then let them appeal, Castellano said. And when they do, I'll make sure every newspaper in New York knows the whole story. About Maria. About Ms. Mitchell. About how Judge Richard Morrison likes to laugh at women who ask him for help. He paused. How many years until you're up for reappointment, Your Honor? 2? 3? Morrison's face had gone from gray to green. He looked like he might vomit right there on his bench. Fine, he whispered. Then louder, fine. The court finds that new evidence has come to light regarding Mr. Mitchell's financial situation. The previous ruling is vacated. Mr. Mitchell, you are hereby ordered to pay $48,000 in back child support within 30 days. Monthly child support is set at $1,500, due on the 1st of each month. Failure to pay will result in immediate contempt charges, wage garnishment, and potential jail time. He banged his gavel weakly. So ordered. Sarah's legs gave out. She sat down hard in her chair, tears streaming down her face. $48,000. $1,500 a month. Emma could have new shoes. They could pay the doctor. They could fix the leak. They could maybe, just maybe, breathe for the first time in 4 years. Thank you, she whispered, looking up at Castellano. Thank you so much. But Castellano wasn't done. He turned to Derek, who looked like he was about to cry himself. Mr. Mitchell, he said softly, if you even think about running, about hiding money, about missing a single payment, I will find you. Do you understand me? Derek nodded frantically. If your daughter ever goes without her medication again, Castellano continued, if her mother has to choose between feeding her and paying rent, if that little girl suffers one more day because of your selfishness, we're going to have a very different conversation. The kind of conversation that doesn't happen in courtrooms. Derek had actually started crying now. I'll pay. I swear I'll pay. Every penny. Please. Good? Castellano said. He turned back to Sarah. Do you have a lawyer for the contempt filing if he doesn't pay? Jennifer stood up. I'll handle it, sir. Pro bono if necessary. It won't be necessary, Castellano said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, handing it to Sarah. My company has lawyers on retainer. Good ones. You call that number if he misses a payment, if the judge tries to backtrack, if anyone gives you trouble. Understood? Sarah took the card with shaking hands. Mr. Castellano, I don't know how to thank you. I don't know why you helped me, but I helped you, Castellano said quietly, because 15 years ago nobody helped Maria. Because judges like Morrison think the law is a game and people like you are just players who don't matter. Because every little girl deserves a father who takes care of her, and if he won't do it willingly, the law should make him. He looked at Morrison one last time. And because some people need to be reminded that power comes with responsibility. Even judges. With that, he turned and walked back down the center aisle, his two companions falling in behind him. The courtroom remained absolutely silent until the doors closed behind them. Then, all at once, the spell broke. People started whispering, phones came out, and Morrison slammed his gavel down 3 times, calling for order. But Sarah didn't hear any of it. She was staring at the business card in her hand, tears still streaming down her face. Emma could have her medication. They could eat real meals. Maybe, just maybe, they could have a life. Jennifer leaned over and squeezed her shoulder. We won, she whispered. Against all odds, we actually won. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. But in the back of her mind, a question was forming. A question that would haunt her for weeks to come. Why had Vincent Castellano really been in that courtroom today? Had it really been coincidence? Or had someone told him about her case? And if so, who? The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of disbelief and cautious hope. Derek's lawyer had called Jennifer 3 times, trying to negotiate the payment terms down. But each time Jennifer simply read back Judge Morrison's order and hung up. On day 14, a cashier's check for $48,000 arrived via certified mail at Jennifer's office. Sarah had cried when Jennifer called to tell her. She'd cried so hard that Mrs. Chun had come upstairs to make sure everything was okay, and then she'd cried some more when Sarah told her why. The first thing Sarah did was take Emma to the pediatrician and pay off the entire outstanding balance. The second thing she did was buy her daughter new shoes, not from the discount bin at Walmart, but real shoes from a real shoe store, the kind with a salesperson who measured Emma's feet and brought out boxes for her to try on. Emma had picked a pair of light-up sneakers with purple sparkles, and the look on her face when they lit up with each step was worth more than all $48,000. The third thing Sarah did was quit her night job. She kept the morning shift at Mel's Diner because she actually liked it there. The regulars knew her name, the tips were decent, and Mel, a gruff 60-year-old with a heart bigger than his belly, had been understanding about her court dates and Emma's doctor appointments. But the cleaning job, the one that had her scrubbing toilets from midnight until 4 a.m., that one she quit without a second thought. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah slept through the night. But the question still nagged at her. Why had Vincent Castellano been there? She'd asked Jennifer, who'd just shrugged and said maybe God sends angels when we need them most. Sarah had asked Mrs. Chun, who'd said maybe the man just had a good heart under all those scary rumors. She'd even worked up the courage to ask Mel one morning during the slow period between breakfast and lunch. Mel had been wiping down the counter when she brought it up, trying to sound casual. You ever heard of Vincent Castellano? Mel's hand had stopped moving. He'd looked up at her sharply, his expression unreadable. Why are you asking about Vincent Castellano? So Sarah had told him the story, leaving out some of the more frightening parts for Emma's sake, since her daughter was coloring at the corner booth. When she finished, Mel had been quiet for a long moment. Vincent Castellano doesn't do things by accident, he'd finally said. If he was in that courtroom, it was because he meant to be there. The question is why. That's what I'm trying to figure out, Sarah had said. Mel had looked at her seriously. My advice? Don't. Some questions are better left unasked, especially when the answer might be complicated. But Sarah couldn't let it go. It was like an itch she couldn't scratch, a puzzle piece that didn't fit. So she did something she probably shouldn't have done. She called the number on his business card. A woman answered on the second ring, her voice professional and crisp. Castellano Enterprises. How may I direct your call? Hi, my name is Sarah Mitchell. Mr. Castellano gave me this number a few weeks ago, and I was hoping to thank him personally? One moment, please. The hold music was classical, something soothing with violins. Sarah's heart was pounding. What was she doing? Mel was right. She should just leave it alone. Take her blessing and move on with her life. Ms. Mitchell, a male voice said, and Sarah almost dropped the phone. This is Tony Soprano. I'm Mr. Castellano's assistant. He's not available at the moment, but I can pass along a message. Okay. Could you just tell him thank you? From me and my daughter. What he did. It changed our lives. I'll tell him, Tony said. And there was something kind in his voice. He'll be glad to know things worked out. Can I ask? Sarah hesitated. Why was he there that day? In the courtroom? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ms. Mitchell, I think that's a question you should ask him directly. But I can tell you this. Mr. Castellano doesn't forget the people who matter to him. What did that mean? Sarah barely knew the man. They'd never met before that day in court. Unless a memory surfaced, hazy and half-forgotten. About 7 years ago, back when she'd first started dating Derek. They'd gone to a restaurant in Little Italy, some fancy place Derek had wanted to impress her with. Sarah had been nervous, underdressed, and she'd accidentally knocked over a glass of red wine that had spilled onto the white tablecloth. The owner had come over, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes. He'd told her not to worry, that accidents happen to everyone, and he'd had the waiter bring them a complimentary dessert. Sarah remembered being struck by how nice he'd been, especially since Derek had been mortified and snapping at her about being more careful. Could that have been Ms. Mitchell? Tony's voice brought her back to the present. Are you still there? Yes, sorry. Thank you for everything. You take care of that little girl, Tony said. And Ms. Mitchell? If Derek gives you any trouble, you use that number. Don't hesitate. I won't, Sarah promised. After she hung up, she stood there for a long moment, staring at her phone. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was still unclear. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Sarah did something she hadn't done in months. She opened her laptop, an old, battered thing that took 5 minutes to boot up, and searched for information about Vincent Castellano. The results were a mix of business articles, society page photographs, and darker rumors that websites danced around without quite stating directly. Vincent Castellano, son of the late Antonio Castellano, ran what was described as a legitimate business empire spanning construction, real estate, and hospitality. But there were other articles too, older ones, that mentioned investigations that went nowhere, connections that couldn't be proven, and a family legacy that stretched back to the Prohibition era. And there, buried in a New York Times article from 15 years ago, Sarah found what she was looking for. Maria Castellano, 24, was found dead in her Queens apartment on Tuesday evening. Her husband, Robert Brennan, has been arrested and charged with second-degree murder. According to court records, Ms. Castellano had sought a restraining order against Brennan 2 weeks prior, but the request was denied by family court judge Richard Morrison, who urged the couple to seek marriage counseling instead. Sarah's hand trembled as she scrolled down to the comments section. There were dozens of them, most angry, some heartbroken. But one caught her eye. Posted by VJC 1957. Maria was my sister's daughter. She was kind, brilliant, and full of life. Judge Morrison killed her as surely as if he'd wielded the weapon himself. I will never forget. I will never forgive. VJC. Vincent J. Castellano. Sarah closed the laptop slowly. Now she understood. Morrison hadn't just made a bad ruling that day in court. He'd been given a chance at redemption. A chance to prove that he'd learned from the worst mistake of his career. And he'd been on the verge of failing again, of laughing off another woman's plea for help, until Vincent Castellano had walked through those doors. But that still didn't explain how Castellano had known about her case specifically. Court dockets were public record. Sure, but there were hundreds of cases every day. How had he known to be there at that exact moment? The answer came 3 days later in the most unexpected way. Sarah was working the lunch shift at Mel's when a young woman came in and sat at the counter. She was maybe 25, dressed in jeans and a NYU sweatshirt, with dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. She ordered coffee and a grilled cheese, then pulled out a laptop and started typing. Sarah brought her order and was about to move on when the woman looked up. "You're Sarah Mitchell, right?" Sarah froze. "Do I know you?" "Not exactly." The woman closed her laptop. "My name is Sofia Castellano. Vincent is my grandfather." Sarah's coffee pot nearly slipped from her hand. She set it down carefully on the counter. "I was in the courthouse that day," Sofia said. "Not in the courtroom, I was there for a law school observation assignment. Family court proceedings. I was sitting outside when you came out of your hearing before it was interrupted. You were crying, and I heard you on the phone with your babysitter, explaining what happened." Sarah vaguely remembered that. She'd called Mrs. Chun from the hallway, trying to hold it together long enough to explain why she'd be late picking up Emma. "I couldn't stop thinking about it," Sofia continued, "about how unfair it was. So I called my grandfather and told him about your case. I didn't ask him to do anything. I just needed to tell someone who would understand." She looked down at her coffee. After what happened to Aunt Maria, Nano has a thing about judges who abuse their power, especially when it involves women and children. I knew if anyone would care, it would be him. Sarah sat down on the stool next to Sofia's, her legs suddenly weak. "So he came because you told him?" Sofia nodded. "He cleared his entire afternoon, showed up at the courthouse and made sure justice was done." She smiled slightly. "That's who he is. Not the man the newspapers write about. The man who remembers every person who ever showed him kindness, and never forgets anyone who causes suffering." Sarah thought about the restaurant owner who'd been kind about the spilled wine. Had that really been Vincent Castellano? And if so, had that one small moment of clumsiness and embarrassment been enough for him to remember her 7 years later? If you're wondering whether this story seems too incredible to be true," Sofia said, as if reading Sarah's mind, "you're probably not alone. If you've made it this far in the story, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. My grandfather always says the best stories are the ones that remind us there's still justice in the world, even when we least expect it." Sarah couldn't help but smile. "Is that really what he says?" "No," Sofia admitted with a grin. "But he should. The point is, you deserved better than what Morrison was going to give you. And sometimes the universe sends someone to make sure you get it." Sarah reached across the counter and squeezed Sofia's hand. "Thank you." for caring enough to make that call. Thank Emma, Sophia said. Kids deserve parents who step up, even if they need a little push. Over the next 6 months, Sarah's life transformed in ways she'd never imagined possible. The child support payments arrived like clockwork on the first of every month. Derek had learned his lesson well. With the financial pressure lifted, Sarah found herself able to breathe, to think, to plan for a future that extended beyond just surviving until the next paycheck. Emma's asthma improved dramatically once they could afford her medication consistently. The wheezing that had kept Sarah awake so many nights gradually faded. Emma started sleeping through the night, which meant Sarah did too. The dark circles under both their eyes disappeared. Emma smiled more, laughed more, brought home artwork from first grade that Sarah proudly displayed on their refrigerator. They moved out of the apartment with the leaking ceiling into a small but sunny 2-bedroom in a better neighborhood. Emma got her own room for the first time in her life and decorated it with posters of astronauts and dolphins. Sarah's room had a window that actually opened and let in fresh air. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and it was safe, and it was enough. Sarah started taking night classes at the community college. Business administration. She'd always been good with numbers, organized, efficient. Mel had been encouraging her for years to aim higher than waiting tables, and now she finally could. 2 nights a week, Mrs. Chun watched Emma while Sarah sat in a classroom with people half her age, learning about accounting principles and management theory. She was good at it, really good. Her professors noticed. One of them, Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, pulled her aside after class one evening. "You have a gift for this," she'd said. "Have you thought about what you want to do after you finish the associate degree?" "I haven't let myself think that far ahead," Sarah had admitted. "Start thinking," Dr. Okonkwo had said firmly. "You're too talented to spend your life taking orders. You should be giving them." The comment had stuck with Sarah, planted a seed that grew slowly but steadily. She hadn't seen Vincent Castellano since that day in court, though Sophia had become a regular at the diner. The young woman was in her final year of law school at NYU, specializing in family law, and she and Sarah had developed an unexpected friendship. Sophia was sharp, funny, and fiercely determined to fix a broken system from the inside. "My grandfather doesn't understand why I want to be a lawyer," Sophia had confided one afternoon over coffee. "He thinks the law is just a weapon that powerful people use against the weak." "What do you think?" Sarah had asked. "I think it can be, but I also think it's the only thing standing between chaos and civilization. Someone has to make sure it's used the right way. Your grandfather used it the right way that day in court." Sophia had smiled. "He has his moments, but don't tell him I said that. His ego is big enough already." It was Sophia who told Sarah about the job opening. She'd mentioned it casually, as if it wasn't the kind of opportunity that could change someone's life. "Castellano Enterprises is looking for an administrative assistant for their community outreach program," Sophia had said, not quite meeting Sarah's eyes. "It's entry level, but the pay is good, and they're open to hiring someone who's still finishing their degree." Sarah had set down her coffee cup carefully. "Sophia, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," Sophia had said firmly. "It's a job. You'd have to interview. You'd have to earn it. And trust me, the woman who runs that department, Mrs. Lopez, doesn't hire anyone out of pity. She's tougher than my grandfather." "Still, look," Sophia had leaned forward. "My grandfather doesn't even know I'm telling you this. This is me, as your friend, letting you know about an opportunity. What you do with that information is up to you." Sarah had thought about it for 3 days. Pride warred with practicality. The job would pay almost twice what she made at the diner, plus benefits. Real health insurance for Emma. Sick days. Vacation time. A career path instead of just a job. She applied. The interview was terrifying. Mrs. Lopez was a formidable woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that seemed to see straight through any pretense. She'd asked hard questions about Sarah's work history, her education, her long-term goals. She hadn't mentioned Vincent Castellano once, hadn't given Sarah any special treatment or knowing looks. At the end of the hour, Mrs. Lopez had shaken Sarah's hand and said, "We'll be in." Sarah had gone home convinced she'd blown it. The job offer came 3 days later. Her first day at Castellano Enterprises was overwhelming. The office was in a sleek high-rise in Midtown, all glass and steel and modern art that probably cost more than Sarah's entire childhood home. The community outreach program occupied the entire 14th floor, and Mrs. Lopez ran it like a general commanding an army. Sarah's job was to coordinate between the various initiatives, scholarship programs, small business grants, youth centers in underserved neighborhoods. It was challenging work that required organization, attention to detail, and the ability to juggle multiple priorities. Sarah threw herself into it with the same fierce determination that had gotten her through 3 years of working 2 jobs. She was good at it. Within a month, Mrs. Lopez had given her additional responsibilities. Within 3 months, she was training new hires. Within 6 months, Mrs. Lopez pulled her aside and said, "You're wasting your potential in this position. When you finish your degree, come talk to me about a promotion." Sarah had gone home that night and cried happy tears for the first time in years. It was almost 8 months after the courtroom confrontation when Sarah finally saw Vincent Castellano again. She'd been working late, finishing a grant proposal that was due the next morning, when she heard voices in the hallway outside her office. She recognized one of them immediately, that quiet, authoritative tone that she'd last heard in Judge Morrison's courtroom. She stood up nervously, smoothing down her skirt, unsure if she should go out and say hello or stay at her desk and pretend she hadn't heard. Before she could decide, there was a gentle knock on her open door. Vincent Castellano stood in her doorway, looking exactly as he had that day in court, silver hair, perfectly tailored suit, that air of understated power. Behind him stood Tony, the assistant she'd spoken to on the phone. "Ms. Mitchell," Castellano said, and his stern face broke into a small smile. "I heard you were burning the midnight oil. I hope Mrs. Lopez isn't working you too hard." "No, sir," Sarah said quickly. "I mean, she works me hard, but it's good work, important work. I'm grateful for the opportunity. May I come in?" "Of course." Castellano entered, and Tony remained in the hallway, a respectful distance away. Castellano looked around her small office, barely more than a cubicle with a door, really. Taking in the family photo of Emma on her desk, the neat stacks of grant applications, the half-empty coffee cup with a lipstick stain on the rim. "Sophia tells me you're doing well here," he said. "I'm trying," Sarah said. "Mr. Castellano, I never properly thanked you for what you did. For me and Emma. You changed our lives." He waved a hand dismissively. "I didn't do anything that the law shouldn't have done on its own. Morrison should have made that ruling without my encouragement." Still, Sarah insisted. "I need you to know what it meant. Emma has her medication now. She's thriving in school. We have a real home. I'm finishing my degree. None of that would have been possible without you." Castellano was quiet for a moment, looking at the photo of Emma. Then he said, "My niece Maria had a daughter. Did you know that?" Sarah shook her head. She was 3 years old when Maria died. Her father, the man who killed her mother, is in prison, as he should be. The girl lives with her other grandmother now, in Pennsylvania. I send money every month for her care. I've set up a trust fund for her education. I do everything I can from a distance." He turned to look at Sarah, and there was an old pain in his eyes. "But I can't give her back her mother. I can't undo the damage that was done. I can't go back in time and make Judge Morrison take that restraining order seriously. All I can do is make sure it doesn't happen to someone else if I can help it." Sarah felt tears prickling at her eyes. "That's why you were there that day." "That's why I was there," he confirmed. "And I'm glad I was. You remind me of Maria in some ways. Strong, determined, willing to fight for what's right even when the system is rigged against you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This is not charity," he said firmly. "This is an investment. Mrs. Lopez tells me you're finishing your associate degree in business administration next semester." "That's right." "Have you thought about continuing? Getting your bachelor's degree?" "I've thought about it," Sarah admitted. "But even with this job, tuition for a 4-year school it's not realistic right now." Castellano held out the envelope. Castellano Enterprises has a scholarship program for employees pursuing higher education. Mrs. Lopez nominated you. The board approved it last week. This covers tuition, books, and fees for any accredited university in the New York area. Sarah's hands shook as she took the envelope. I can't. You can and you will, Castellano said firmly. Because Emma deserves a mother who achieves her full potential. Because you deserve the opportunities that were stolen from you by a selfish man and an unjust system. And because someday, when you're successful and established, you'll help someone else the way I helped you. That's how we make the world a little less cruel. Sarah opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter of acceptance into the scholarship program, along with information about how to apply it to the school of her choice. The amount made her gasp. It was enough for a full bachelor's degree at a good school, with money left over for a master's if she wanted it. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say you'll make the most of it, Castellano said. Say you'll finish your degree, build your career, and show your daughter that hard work and determination can overcome anything. I will, Sarah promised. I swear I will. Good. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing, Ms. Mitchell. Derek has been making his payments on time. Yes, sir. Every month. See that he continues, Castellano said quietly. Because if he doesn't, I keep my promises too. He smiled slightly, and there was something both warm and terrifying in that smile. Have a good evening. Don't work too late. After he left, Sarah sat at her desk for a long time, staring at the scholarship letter. Then she picked up her phone and called Emma, who was at Mrs. Chen's apartment doing homework. Baby, Sarah said when Emma answered. How would you like it if Mommy went back to school? Real school at a university? Would you still be home for dinner? Emma asked, her 6-year-old priorities perfectly clear. Every night, Sarah promised. Then I think it's a good idea, Emma said seriously. Mrs. Chun says education is important. Mrs. Chun is right, Sarah said, smiling through her tears. That night, walking home from the office, Sarah passed the courthouse where it had all begun. The building was dark, the windows blank and empty. She wondered if Judge Morrison was still there, still making rulings, still deciding people's fates with the same casual cruelty he'd shown her. Then she decided she didn't care. Morrison was the past. He was powerless to hurt her now. Her future and Emma's future was bright with possibility. And it had all started with a man who remembered his niece, who refused to let injustice go unchallenged, who believed that the law should protect the powerless instead of serving the powerful. Sarah had learned something important that day in the courtroom, something she'd carry with her forever. Sometimes the world really does send angels when you need them most. They just don't always look the way you expect. 3 years later, Sarah Mitchell walked across the stage at Hunter College's graduation ceremony wearing a blue cap and gown, her bachelor's degree in business administration clutched in her hand. The auditorium was packed with families, the air thick with the scent of flowers and hairspray and collective pride. Camera flashes went off like fireworks. In the third row, Emma sat between Mrs. Chan and Sophia Castellano, waving frantically and holding a homemade sign that read "My MOM is the smartest" in purple glitter. She was 9 years old now, tall for her age, healthy and happy. The inhaler she'd once needed multiple times a day now sat unused in a drawer at home, pulled out only occasionally during bad allergy seasons. Sarah waved back, grinning so hard her face hurt. She'd graduated summa cum laude, top 5% of her class. She'd done it while working full-time at Castellano Enterprises, while raising Emma, while building a life she'd once thought was impossible. There had been late nights and early mornings, moments when she'd been so exhausted she'd fallen asleep with her textbook open on her chest. But she'd done it. After the ceremony, after the photos and the tears and the congratulations, Sarah found herself surrounded by her small but fierce chosen family. Mrs. Chun had brought dumplings, of course she had. Sophia had brought champagne, the expensive kind. Emma had brought a card she'd made herself, covered in drawings of stars and rockets, because Sarah had told her once that getting an education was like launching yourself into space, toward new worlds. And standing slightly apart from the group, hands in his pockets, looking distinguished in a charcoal suit, was Vincent Castellano. He'd come quietly, sat in the back, applauded politely. Now he approached Sarah with that same slight smile he'd worn in her office 3 years ago. "Congratulations, Ms. Mitchell," he said, shaking her hand formally. "Though I suppose it's Ms. Mitchell BA now." Sarah laughed. "Feels surreal. I keep waiting to wake up and find out this was all a dream." "It's not a dream," Castellano said. "It's what happens when someone with talent is given a fair chance." He glanced at Emma, who was showing Mrs. Chun every page of her card. "She's grown. She has," Sarah agreed. "She wants to be an astronaut now. Last year it was a veterinarian. Before that, a chef. Smart kid, keeping her options open." He pulled an envelope from his jacket, always with the envelopes, and handed it to Sarah. "This is from the board. For your service to the company and completion of the scholarship program. Mr. Castellano, you've already done so much. Open it." Sarah opened the envelope. Inside was a letter promoting her to Program Director of Community Outreach, with a salary that made her breath catch. It was more than double what she currently made. It was the kind of money that meant security, savings, college funds, maybe even a small house someday. "Mrs. Lopez is retiring next year," Castellano explained. "She's recommended you as her replacement. You'd be overseeing the entire department. 23 employees. An annual budget of $18 million. It's not a gift, Ms. Mitchell. It's a job offer. One you'll have to prove you can handle." "I can handle it," Sarah said immediately, and she meant it. She'd learned over the past 3 years that she was capable of far more than she'd ever imagined. "I know you can," Castellano said. "That's why I signed off on the promotion." Before Sarah could respond, a familiar and unwelcome voice cut through the celebration. Well, look who graduated." Sarah turned to see Derek standing at the edge of the crowd, looking uncomfortable in a suit that didn't quite fit right. He'd put on weight over the past few years, and his hairline had receded noticeably. He looked older than his 35 years, and there was something defeated in his posture. "Derek," Sarah said coolly, "what are you doing here?" "I'm still her father," Derek said, gesturing toward Emma, who had noticed him and gone very still. "I have a right to be at my daughter's mother's graduation." "You have the right to pay child support," Sophia interjected sharply, stepping forward. "Which, to your credit, you've been doing. But let's not pretend you're winning Father of the Year." Derek flushed. "I've been trying to be better. I've been paying. Every month. On time." "You have," Sarah acknowledged. "And Emma and I appreciate that." "I want to see her more," Derek said, and there was something almost desperate in his voice. "I want to be part of her life. I made mistakes, Sarah. I know that, but I'm trying to fix them." Emma had moved closer to Sarah, holding onto her arm. Sarah could feel her daughter's uncertainty, the complicated mix of emotions that came from having a father who was technically present but had never really been there. "That's something we can discuss," Sarah said carefully. "But not here. Not now. This is a celebration, Derek. If you want to talk about custody arrangements, you can call me next week." "I just want to say congratulations," Derek said quietly. "You always were the smart one. I was stupid to not see it." It was perhaps the most genuine thing Derek had ever said to her. Sarah felt her anger soften slightly, just slightly. "Thank you," she said. Derek looked at Emma. "Hey kiddo, you look pretty." "Thanks," Emma said softly, not moving from Sarah's side. Derek seemed to realize he wasn't going to get more than that. He nodded awkwardly and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of other families. "That was uncomfortable," Sophia muttered. "That was growth," Castellano said quietly. "Not much, perhaps, but more than he showed in that courtroom 3 years ago." "Do you think people can really change?" Sarah asked, watching Derek's retreating back. "Some can," Castellano said. "Most don't. But occasionally, when the alternative is losing everything that matters, a man will surprise you." He looked at Sarah. "You changed. You were always strong, always determined. But you learned to believe in yourself. That's the hardest change of all." The celebration moved to a nearby restaurant, one of Castellano's, naturally, though he insisted it was just a coincidence. The food was incredible, the wine flowed freely, and Emma got to order anything she wanted from the menu, which meant 3 desserts. As the evening wound down and Mrs. Chun took a sleepy Emma home in a taxi, Sarah found herself alone with Castellano and Sophia at a quiet corner table. "I need to tell you something," Sarah said, looking at both of them. I've been thinking about it for a while now, and tonight feels like the right time. What's on your mind? Sophia asked. When I take over Mrs. Lopez's position next year, Sarah said slowly, I want to create a new initiative within the program. A legal fund specifically for single parents fighting custody and support battles. Free legal representation for people who can't afford lawyers like Mr. Beckman. People like I was. Sophia's eyes lit up. That's brilliant. It would be expensive, Castellano warned, though he didn't sound opposed. I know, Sarah said. I've been running the numbers. We could start small. Maybe 5 cases the first year. Partner with law schools. Get students involved for the experience. Build it up over time. She looked at Castellano directly. You saved my life because someone told you about my case. But how many Sarah Mitchells are out there right now, sitting in courtrooms just like I was, with no one to help them? Hundreds, Sophia said quietly. Maybe thousands just in New York. So we help them, Sarah said firmly. We create a system where people don't need to get lucky. Where justice isn't a matter of knowing the right person or having someone powerful walk through the door at the right moment. Castellano was quiet for a long moment, swirling the wine in his glass. Then he smiled. A real smile this time. Not the slight upturn of lips, but an actual expression of joy. Maria would have loved this, he said softly. She always wanted to help people. That's why she stayed with that bastard as long as she did. She thought she could fix him, save him. She couldn't save herself, but maybe... He looked at Sarah. Maybe this is how we save others in her name. The Maria Castellano Justice Fund, Sarah said. If you'll allow it. Castellano's eyes grew bright, and he looked away quickly, composing himself. He nodded once, sharply. It would be an honor. I'll handle the legal framework, Sophia said immediately, already pulling out her phone to make notes. I know at least a dozen recent law school grads who'd kill for this kind of experience. And I can reach out to some professors about creating an internship program. They spent the next hour planning, discussing, building something beautiful out of old pain. By the time they left the restaurant, they had the skeleton of a program that could genuinely change lives. Outside, the New York night was warm and bright with city lights. Castellano's car was waiting at the curb, but he paused before getting in. Ms. Mitchell, he said. Sarah, you've exceeded every expectation I had for you. But more than that, you've become the kind of person who looks at her own success and immediately asks how she can help others achieve the same. That's rare. That's precious. I learned from the best, Sarah said, meeting his eyes. No, Castellano said gently. You already had it in you. I just made sure you got the chance to show it. He opened the car door, then paused again. One more thing. Judge Morrison. What about him? He's retiring next month. Early retirement. Apparently, the pressure of the job has become too much for him. Sarah didn't ask what that meant. She didn't need to. The world is full of judges, Castellano continued. Some good, some bad, most somewhere in between. But perhaps the next person who sits in Morrison's courtroom will remember that every case represents a real life. Real suffering. Real hope. Perhaps, Sarah agreed. Make sure of it, Castellano said. That's what your fund is for. To hold them accountable. To give the powerless a voice. He got into his car, and Sophia followed. Through the window, he raised his hand in farewell. Sarah waved back, watching until the taillights disappeared into traffic. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, her diploma tucked under her arm, feeling the weight of the future settling onto her shoulders. It was a good weight, purposeful weight. Somewhere in the city, there was another Sarah Mitchell sitting in another courtroom, facing another judge who didn't care. Another single mother working herself to exhaustion, another child going without, another Derek who'd learned he could escape responsibility. But soon, not today, not tomorrow, but soon, that woman would have help. She'd have lawyers, resources, the full weight of the Maria Castellano Justice Fund behind her. She'd have hope. And hope, Sarah had learned, was the most powerful force in the world. She turned toward the subway, toward home, toward Emma and the life they'd built together. Tomorrow she'd go back to work. Next year she'd take over the department. And the year after that, they'd launch the fund. But tonight, she'd simply be grateful. Grateful for a man who'd remembered his niece. Grateful for a law student who'd cared enough to make a phone call. Grateful for the chance to prove that setbacks weren't endings. They were just the start of better beginnings. The courthouse where it had all started was 12 blocks away. Sarah didn't walk past it. She didn't need to anymore. She'd already won. 5 years later, the conference room on the 18th floor of Castellano Enterprises overlooked Central Park, the autumn trees ablaze with orange and gold. Sarah stood at the head of the table, a clicker in her hand, presenting the annual report to the board of directors. She was 39 years old now, confident in a way she'd never imagined possible. Her hair was cut in a professional bob, and she wore a tailored navy suit that actually fit properly. Not because it was her only nice outfit, but because she'd chosen it from several in her closet. Small luxuries that still felt miraculous. The Maria Castellano Justice Fund has successfully represented 143 cases in the past 4 years, she said, clicking to the next slide. Our success rate is 87%. We've recovered over $3 million in unpaid child support. More importantly, we've helped secure safe custody arrangements for children in dangerous situations, obtained restraining orders that were previously denied, and provided legal education workshops to over 2,000 single parents across the 5 boroughs. The board members nodded, taking notes. Vincent Castellano sat at the far end of the table, his hair more white than gray now, but his eyes as sharp as ever. Next to him sat Sophia, who'd passed the bar 3 years ago and now served as the fund's legal director while maintaining her own practice. The fund has also created a ripple effect we didn't anticipate, Sarah continued. 7 family court judges in New York have changed their practices regarding support enforcement. 3 have publicly credited our legal challenges with helping them understand the real-world impact of their decisions. And Judge Morrison's replacement, Judge Keisha Williams, has implemented new protocols requiring documented financial disclosure in all support cases. She clicked to a photo, a black woman in her 40s, smiling warmly, shaking hands with a tearful mother outside a courtroom. Judge Williams granted a restraining order last week that likely saved a woman's life, Sarah said quietly. The case was almost identical to Maria Castellano's. But this time, the judge listened. This time, the system worked. The room was silent for a moment. Castellano's expression was unreadable, but Sarah saw him touch the gold ring on his right hand, the one he always wore, the one that had belonged to his brother, Maria's father. In conclusion, Sarah said, advancing to the final slide, the fund is not only sustainable but growing. We've received grant applications from organizations in Boston, Philadelphia, and Chicago who want to replicate our model. With the board's approval, I'd like to propose expanding our mission beyond New York. Approved, Castellano said immediately, and the other board members murmured their agreement. After the meeting, Sarah packed up her materials while the board members filed out. Sophia lingered, perching on the edge of the conference table. You killed it, Sophia said. Though you always do. I'm just presenting the work we all do, Sarah said. You're the one in the courtrooms every day actually fighting these battles. And you're the one who made it possible, Sophia countered. Don't downplay yourself, Sarah. You've built something extraordinary here. We've built something extraordinary, Sarah corrected. The door opened, and Vincent Castellano entered, closing it behind him. He moved slower than he had 5 years ago, and there was a cane in his hand that hadn't been there before. He'd had a health scare 2 years back. Nothing serious, the doctor said, just age catching up with him. But it had reminded everyone, including Castellano himself, that time was precious. Walk with me, he said to Sarah. They took the elevator down to the lobby and walked out into the crisp October afternoon. Central Park was across the street, and they strolled through the entrance, joining the flow of joggers, dog walkers, and tourists. I'm going to retire, Castellano said without preamble. Sarah stopped walking. When? Next year. I'm 73 years old, Sarah. I've spent 50 years building businesses, making deals, settling debts. It's time to let the next generation take over. Sophia, among others. But I wanted to talk to you about something first. He stopped at a bench overlooking the pond and sat down carefully, gesturing for Sarah to join him. When I created the community outreach program 30 years ago, It was because I'd made a lot of money and felt guilty about how I'd made some of it. I thought writing checks would ease my conscience. You've done so much more than that, Sarah said. Because of people like you, he agreed. People who understand that real change requires more than money. It requires commitment, creativity, and courage. He looked at her. I want you to take over the entire foundation, not just the outreach program. All of it. The scholarships, the youth centers, the small business grants, everything. Sarah's breath caught. Mr. Castellano, that's a massive responsibility. That's why I'm offering it to you and not someone else. He smiled slightly. You were a single mother working 2 jobs, trying to keep your daughter alive while a judge laughed at your pain. Now you're running a program that's changing how family courts operate across the state. If anyone knows how to use resources to create meaningful change, it's you. What about Sophia? Sophia is a brilliant lawyer, but she doesn't want to run a foundation. She wants to be in courtrooms, fighting individual battles. That's where she belongs. You, on the other hand, have a gift for seeing the big picture, for building systems that last beyond any one person. Sarah was quiet, watching ducks paddle across the pond. Emma was 14 now, thriving in a good public school, already talking about colleges. They'd moved into a small house in Queens 2 years ago. Nothing fancy, but it had a yard and a room for Emma and a home office where Sarah could work when she needed to. Derek saw Emma twice a month now, supervised visits that had gradually become unsupervised as he'd proven himself reliable. He'd never be father of the year, but he showed up, paid his support, and tried. It was more than Sarah had expected from him. Her life was stable. Good. She could take a risk now. She could reach for something bigger. I'll do it, she said. Just like that? Castellano looked amused. Just like that, Sarah confirmed. Because 5 years ago you gave me a chance when no one else would. Because Maria deserves a legacy that extends beyond one fund. Because there are 1,000 different ways people fall through the cracks of society, and I want to build safety nets for all of them. Castellano stood, leaning on his cane, and offered his hand. Then it's settled. We'll make the announcement in January. They shook hands, and Sarah felt the weight of possibility settling onto her shoulders once again. It was heavier than last time, but she was stronger now. She could carry it. One more thing, Castellano said as they walked back toward the office. Emma. Sophia tells me she's interested in law school someday. She is, Sarah confirmed. She watched what the fund does, and she wants to be part of it. Though last week she was talking about forensic science, so who knows? When the time comes, Castellano said, there's a scholarship waiting for her. Full ride any school she gets into. No strings attached. Sarah stopped walking. You've already done so much for us. And I'll do more if I can, Castellano said simply. That's what family does. Family. The word hung in the air between them. We're not actually related, Sarah said softly. Castellano looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Family isn't just blood, Sarah. It's the people who show up when you need them. The people who fight for you, who believe in you, who refuse to let you fall. He gestured back toward the office building. Sophia, Mrs. Chin, Tony, me. We're your family whether you like it or not. Sarah felt tears prickling at her eyes. I like it very much. Good. Because you're stuck with us. He started walking again, then called over his shoulder. Don't be late for dinner on Sunday. Mrs. Chun is making those dumplings you like, and if we start without you, Emma will eat them all. Sarah laughed, wiping her eyes. I'll be there. She watched him walk away. This complicated man who'd been equal parts savior and mystery. She'd learned over the years that the rumors about him were probably true. All of them. Vincent Castellano had built his empire using methods that didn't always appear in business textbooks. He'd made enemies, settled scores, operated in shadows as much as light. But he'd also remembered his niece. He'd walked into a courtroom to defend a stranger. He'd created systems to help people who had nothing. He'd given Sarah and Emma a future. People were complicated. The world was complicated. Justice was messy and imperfect and sometimes required powerful people to step in when the system failed. Sarah had made peace with those contradictions. That evening, she picked Emma up from school. A luxury she still treasured, being able to leave work at a reasonable hour. Emma bounced into the car, full of energy and stories about some drama in the cafeteria. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Emma said as they drove home. "Always," Sarah said. "Why does Mr. Castellano do all this? The fund, the scholarships, everything." "Sophia says he's rich enough that he doesn't have to care about people like us." "People like us," Sarah repeated. "You know we're not poor anymore, right? We're doing well now. You know what I mean? Regular people. People who aren't powerful." Sarah thought about how to answer. She'd always been honest with Emma about their past, about the struggles they'd faced. Emma knew about the courtroom, about Derek's failures, about the judge who'd laughed. "Mr. Castellano lost someone he loved," Sarah finally said. "Someone who should have been protected by the law but wasn't. And instead of just being angry about it, he decided to make sure it wouldn't happen to other people if he could help it. That's why he helped us. That's part of it. But I also think he helps people because he believes everyone deserves a fair chance. He told me once that the world is full of people who need help and people who can help. The trick is connecting." Emma was quiet for a moment. "When I grow up, I want to help people too." "You will," Sarah said, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. "You already do, just by being kind and thoughtful and caring about others." That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and her laptop. She pulled up a blank document and started writing. "The Maria Castellano Justice Fund, a model for replication." She wrote about the legal framework Sophia had created, about the partnerships with law schools, about the funding structure and case selection process. She wrote about the successes and the failures, about what had worked and what they'd had to adjust. She wrote a blueprint that other cities could follow, other organizations could adapt. Because Vincent Castellano was right. Family wasn't just blood. It was the people who showed up. And Sarah was going to show up for every person who'd ever sat in a courtroom like she had, desperate and alone, facing a system that didn't care. She was going to show up for them the way Vincent Castellano had shown up for her. The document grew to 50 pages, then 100. It took her 3 months to finish, working late at night after Emma went to bed, refining and revising until it was perfect. When it was done, she sent it to nonprofit organizations across the country, to law schools, to anyone who might use it to help someone in need. Within 6 months, the first replication program launched in Chicago. Within a year, there were 5 more. Within 2 years, the model had spread to 14 cities. And everywhere it went, it changed lives. Years later, when people asked Sarah Mitchell how she'd gone from a struggling single mother to the director of one of the most influential charitable foundations in New York, she always told them the same thing. "I got lucky," she'd say. "Someone saw me when I needed to be seen. Someone cared when I needed someone to care. Someone reminded a judge that power comes with responsibility." And then she'd add, "But luck isn't enough. You have to be ready when opportunity comes. You have to work harder than everyone else. You have to believe you deserve better, even when the world tells you otherwise. And most importantly, you have to remember where you came from and help others climb the same ladder you did." That was the legacy of Maria Castellano. Not her death, but the life she'd inspired others to build. Not the tragedy, but the justice that had finally, eventually, prevailed. Sarah thought about that first day in the courtroom often. The humiliation, the despair, the sound of the judge's cruel laughter. And then the doors opening, and a man walking in who changed everything. Life was funny that way. Your worst moment could become the turning point. Your deepest pain could become your greatest purpose. You just had to survive long enough to see it. Thank you so much for staying with Sarah's story until the very end. If her journey touched your heart, if you believe in second chances, in fighting for justice, in the power of showing up for people who need help, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment telling us what you thought. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone unexpected changed your life? Or maybe you were the person who showed up for someone else. We'd love to hear your stories. And if there's a particular topic or type of story you'd like us to cover next, let us know. Every comment, every like, every subscription helps us continue creating content that matters. Remember, you never know when your moment will come. Stay ready, stay strong, and when you get your chance, Reach back and help someone else climb up behind you. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.